Well, good afternoon everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this first ever Future Book webinar, which we are running in association with Udo Media. We have three really great speakers today, tackling the difficult topic of how to make money from publishing illustrated books in the digital space. The speakers are Simon Applebe, Digital Projects Manager for one of the UK's biggest illustrated publishers, Octopus, and Gavin Griffith, author and publisher for one of the smallest, the independent publisher Microvar Media. Finally, Richard Stevenson, Chief Executive of e-Publishing Specialist, Udo Media, will present a strategy overview of how illustrated publishers can profit from digital. In print, the illustrated book market covers everything from coffee table to cookery titles and is worth more than 50 million to UK booksellers. In digital, with the iBooks store, a possible colour Kindle and a Nook colour, there is a sense that its moment has arrived. With the Kindle market, a guide to future growth perhaps. So first, I hand you over to Simon Applebe, who will share some of his experiences of publishing digitally at Octopus. He will then hand over to Gavin. Simon.
Thank you very much, Philip. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Digital Projects Manager for Octopus Publishing Group, which, as you may well know, is the illustrated division of Hachette UK. We cover a broad spectrum of illustrated non-fiction areas: cookery, gardening, wine, antiques, lifestyle, mind, body and spirit, amongst others. It's my job, as my title suggests, to basically look after every aspect of what we do digitally, and not just to deliver projects, but to also try and broaden the experience and exposure of everyone else in the business to digital skills and ways of thinking about things. As we know, and as Philip said in his introduction, digital is moving very rapidly. There are new devices coming out all the time. We had the Kindle last year, which was a massive hit for Amazon in time for Christmas. We've got new phones, new tablets coming out all the time. So there's a real sense with digital that it can be difficult to know when the right time to put your toe in the water is, because there's always a new device around the corner. There may be a new business model around every corner. What I'm going to try to do today is just give you some sense of how we've approached the decisions about when to jump into those marketplaces and what we've learned in the process. There are two main areas that we're going to talk about today: smartphone apps, iPhone apps and so on, and eBooks. But it's also important not to forget that the web has not gone away. To some extent, apps have distracted from the idea of making money from the web to a large degree, but there may well be cases where it is a better business opportunity than some of these other options. So first of all, talking about apps, very much been perceived in a lot of places as the moment for illustrated publishers to jump in, to follow our trade publishing brethren into the digital world. It's important to remember there's more to apps than just Apple. Android phones actually have a larger market share in the United States, for instance. So apps and Apple do not have to be synonymous, and there are a range of ways to consider making money from apps. Obviously you can sell them, you can give them away for free and then sell content within them, and you can also sell advertising, use the old special sales skills effectively of getting someone else to pay for something in return for putting their name on it. There's various options available. The things that we like about apps at Octopus, you've got far more control of presentation and the functionality of what you create. You've got a lot more toys to play with in terms of what the devices can do. They've got GPS, so they know where the user is. They've got a camera and got an accelerometer, so they know which way up they are, which is what enables them to do things like pretending to be spirit levels. So you've got all of those toys that you can use to deliver non-linear user experiences, and the screenshots that you can see on the right of the screen are from our Colour Me Beautiful app, which ties in loosely to our publishing with Colour Me Beautiful, an organisation who focus on colour matching and all aspects of colour in fashion. So the focus there was very much on helping people to quickly and simply get a taste of what was involved in the product, but also with the colour comparison you see in the bottom right to utilise the camera capabilities of the phone to compare the colour in a photograph to the colour from a swatch. Things that we don't like so much about apps mostly centre around marketing and promotion. It's very difficult to know how you're going to reach people. App store environments are difficult in which to operate. You don't have the same certainties that you do in a physical retail environment. It's very hard to know what you have to do to get Apple, for instance, to promote your app. Apps are also very expensive. This is getting cheaper, but it's still equivalent to developing a medium-sized website, for the sake of argument, rather than equivalent to the cost of developing an ebook or even a series of ebooks. And you've also got, as with all things electronic, to make sure that you own the relevant rights in your text and images. I think the biggest problem around apps is that consumer expectations are very, very high. They're used to getting people for free. People are used to getting things for free. They're used to getting things for very cheap, 59p, £1.19. So if we go in as publishers with something which feels cheap to us, which might be £3.99, £4.99, then we still run the risk of being perceived by a very vocal consumer base as trying to rip people off. Our Hugh Johnson Wine Guide app is based on a best-selling wine book which has been going since 1977, I believe. It's content that lends itself very well to being converted into a database. It's structured content. Again, it's non-linear content. So we databased everything, and we made it so that people could browse it, search it, save their favourites, all the things that you would probably want to do with a book of that type. And we were very fortunate to be able to develop that as a digital co-edition with the German publishers who take the German edition of the book. So that is a model which, if it's available to you as a publisher, is potentially a very good way of sharing risk and defraying cost. In terms of what we learned that preparing content for delivery can be just as expensive as creating the app itself. We learned that there's a real tension between book pricing and app pricing. The book retails for $10.99. It's in the App Store for $4.99. That feels cheap to us. It still feels expensive to a lot of consumers. We were very fortunate marketing-wise that Apple promoted the app for us on the homepage of the App Store, but you can't bank on that happening, and you have to have a backup plan to reach people. And we learned that the consumers who we reached were not, by and large, people who were aware of the book. So although we're basing the book on a publishing brand, people are judging it. People are judging the app on its own merit and not really seeing how it relates to the physical publishing that belongs with it. Moving on to ebooks, which are, of course, the talk of the town at the moment, especially with the US seeing, 10% plus in some cases of the market moving to digital editions. Obviously, they have been the primary digital focus for publishers of fiction and narrative text for a long time. The technology is moving very rapidly. The US has, for instance, the Nook Color reader, which is sold by Barnes & Noble, which I've had a play with, and is, a very nice piece of kit, about half the size of an iPad, very shiny, touchscreen, makes the Kindle feel quite old-fashioned, although it does a different thing in a different way. Ebooks, you've got the option for straight ebooks, reflowed ebooks, original ebooks, and then any of those things can be enhanced. And I'll just talk through what those different types of ebook mean. Straight ebooks are the ones we know and love, EPUBs and for Amazon Mobi Pockets. Single column of text, nothing extraordinary, very few illustrations. We all know they're pretty straightforward to do. Reflowed ebooks is where Octopus is now having more or less exhausted the scope for sort of converting our straight text backlist, and that is taking a book, still delivering it as an EPUB, but using a more sort of artisan approach to conversion to simplify more complicated books, cookery books, gardening books, any kind of illustrated content, possibly taking out elements that don't work. And we're very confident that that's going to be a good approach for us. And then you've also got, and this I think is the most exciting in a lot of ways, the potential to do original content which doesn't have a physical counterpart, which can be cut down books, stuff that has gone out of print, first chapters of books, bind-ups of different elements of publishing, which means you can be quite experimental with price point, with the offer. You can give people samplers and tasters at very little commercial risk, and just allows you to broaden your content propositions, really. Enhanced ebooks, any type of EPUB can be enhanced with video, with audio, with web links. It's important to make sure that you don't just throw enhanced content in just because it's there. It needs to be editorially relevant, and I think probably our view at the moment is that you won't be able to command a price premium for basic enhancement. It's possible if a title has been designed from the ground up to be an enhanced ebook, then that would be different. But we're not primarily looking at enhanced ebooks as a way of commanding a higher price for our product. Just a quick ebook case study. Our Hamlin All Colour cookery titles, which we have over 30 of now available as EPUB, are selling well on Amazon. People will buy colour cookery titles for a black and white reading device, which surprised us and may surprise you. Consumers are quite price sensitive. Generally in the charts, stuff under a fiver is what's going well. We've priced a book that's often available for sale under £5 at £2.99. And Apple are very keen to provide promotional support, especially of range titles, which I think is important. If you've got ranges that you can convert, then it obviously offers a strong cross-selling opportunity. So just to summarise, apps definitely are an opportunity. I don't wish to sound like I'm being overly negative about them, but with the commercial dynamics, with the way that consumers think, it's very, very important to have a good understanding of the competition, a good understanding of how consumers may react, and a good understanding of the level of risk and reward that you're entering into on an app project. eBooks are a much safer bet. There's a lower cost of conversion, and I think 2011 should be the year of experimenting in terms of new original content, different formats which are still standards based and will work with any EPUB compatible reader. And above all else, excuse me, above all else, it's important, whether you're doing apps, ebooks, web, something else, to be acquiring the sort of skills and know-how within your business to take advantage of whatever comes around the corner, because the only thing that is absolutely certain is that this will all have changed probably beyond recognition within about a year from now. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to taking any questions at the end, and I'm now going to hand over to Gavin.
It's Philip first. Thank you, Simon.
Sorry.
Just to reiterate at this point that feel free to use the webinar software to ask questions, and I will ask some of the panelists at the end of the session. We've got an hour, but we can extend that a little bit if we get some questions towards the end. Thank you to Simon. That was a very good overview from a big publisher's perspective. Now we hand over to Gavin, who is a writer and publisher and has recently begun the journey of getting his title onto the internet in various ways, and he will now explain how he has done that as well as how he's managed the risk. Gavin.
Hi, thank you. From the complete other end of the spectrum, my name is Gavin Griffith. I'm a managing director of a small publishing firm, and just to give you the background, in late 2009, being slightly opportunistic, I wrote a book about how to make extra money in a recession, and we actually pitched the idea to Sainsbury's before we'd even written it, and they liked the idea, so we printed 15,000 copies, put them on the newsstand, and they sold pretty well. It proved itself to work. So in 2010, after the success of this, we decided that we'd try and get the book into the traditional book retail market. Given that we're magazine publishers, it was a bit of a journey for us. But what we found that it was very, very difficult to expand this distribution beyond what we already had. Not only was it quite risky, but it was also very expensive. But the book had quite a lot of press interest and TV coverage, and we weren't really ready to just give up on it. So this was the challenge. Most retailers we spoke to, if they were going to accept it, wanted a large volume. There was pressure to promote it in store, which is obviously expensive. Sale or return, again, not something we were hugely interested in when you're printing lots and lots of copies. And then we found dealing with each retailer very labour intensive. And then coupled with the fact that in the traditional retail market we weren't really getting any consumer insights, because the relationship with the customer is with the retailer. And coming from a magazine background, we quite like to have that kind of feedback from clients. And then throwing this into the mix as a change in consumer buying habits, and it's fairly clear now that a tipping point has been reached. And with the Kindle and e-readers, Apple and the tablets, and also people digesting a lot of content on the internet. So as an entrepreneurial publishing business, the question for us is, how do we create an opportunity with a product that we believe has potential? And this was our solution. We created a bespoke one-stop destination where we could direct customers or potential customers to buy the book in any single format that they wanted. Really, our view is that it isn't up to us how we decide what format we're going to create our books in. It's up to the consumer how they want to buy it. So our job really is to make it available in as many different formats as possible. And secondly, what we wanted to do was try and create a direct relationship with those readers. Interestingly, with a lot of internet purchasing, up to 70% of people will drop out of the buying process by the time they get to the shopping cart. So what we've done on our site is we've created what's called a squeeze page, so that we record their information, so that when those 70% do drop out, we can continue to target them. And also we can sell them more books at a later date. So how did we approach this? Well, it became apparent that trying to do it ourselves is very difficult. Apple aren't really up for having a direct conversation with small publishers like us. And we had a relationship with Udo from our magazine activities, and they seemed like the perfect people to partner up with. So taking our PDF files that we'd generated for creating the actual physical book, Udo turned those into EPUB files, which are the basis of creating the eBooks on the iStore and the Kindle. They've also got UD Plus, which is this web-based system where people can read the book after paying to download it. And then we've also got on the site physical book purchasing through PayPal, Google Checkout, and we've also put a little eBay shop together because a lot of people trust eBay as a buying tool. So essentially, we have just launched. So you're with us really right at the beginning of our journey, and I'm hoping that in months that in 3 or so months' time, when the next one of these is, that we'll be invited along to perhaps give an update as to where we've got to. Our objectives now, we want to develop a continual order flow. So a lot of books, they come out, there's a huge amount of publicity, big explosion, and then they kind of, the sales diminish. We want to we're using SEO techniques and PR to keep the message of this out there. We're also able to get instant feedback as to how that promotional activity works. We don't have to wait for the sales of the books to go through the retailer. We can get really up to the minute feedback as to what works and what doesn't. We're also collecting data so that we can convert people who slip off the purchase path, hit them up again with a special offer, or new books if they become an existing customer. We also we're minimizing our risk. A lot of these digital products don't require massive investment. The margins remain good, and of course we want to reduce trees being chopped down. So essentially what we're trying to do now is give potential customers every opportunity to buy the book. And hopefully I'll be around at the end to answer any questions if anybody's got any for me.
Thank you, Gavin. Now we hand over to Richard Stevenson, who's Chief Executive of UDO Media, who will present a strategy overview of the illustrated book market and its digital potential. Richard. Richard, over to you.
Sorry, it's Richard here. Sorry, Richard Stevenson. A little gap in the technology there. Yes, what I'm going to do is concentrate on the money side of saying how do we actually make money from illustrated books, and that's the most important thing that we need at the end of the day is to say it actually works for the businesses we're involved in. So just a little bit about UDO. We've been publishing on the web since 2003, so we've done a lot of things on the web. We're very experienced in that area. We've got a self-publishing system which is pushing about 1,200 publications out every day. We've got 65 iPad and 65 iPhone apps live, and so that gives us a very good overview of what's actually happening, so we can see the stats on all of those for our various clients. The rest of it is just sort of putting up the fact is we've won a lot of technology awards, but let's move on. And what I'd like to do is just look at this equation, really, and this is something that's put up as a sort of little seesaw here, is that on the plus side, the great thing is what you can do with these type of digital products and digital books on the web is to say there's a great chance of new revenue. There are a bunch of new readers which you can reach that physically you can't reach necessarily through the distribution of physical copies. And there are a lot of publishing companies with tremendous back catalogues which are still valid today but can in fact be given a lease of life and actually can be monetized. And against that, as Simon was illustrating, you've got to balance this investment cost against the opportunities. And then, of course, this question that Simon was covering as well, which I'm going to cover here, is how to do it. And with illustrated books, you've got a little bit more problem to sort out the rights, because clearly, there are the photograph rights and there's graphic rights, etc., which are associated with illustrated books. So I put sort of famous 5 issues so we can sort of try and get the language correct. On the top left-hand side, over here, I put sort of a data interactive mobile apps. This is what a lot of people think about on the mobile phones. That was well illustrated by Simon with his Hugh Johnson app. app, and that is where you've got, say, a database-driven app or some functionality, and we shouldn't just really be talking about the software to operate there, but actually all the back end required to actually drive that app properly. They tend to be expensive to do, and you've got to pick some key brands to make that really work. On the right-hand side over here, we've got the bespoke reading apps, and there's been some fantastic work where publishers have picked certain titles. I don't know if any of you have seen Heart in a Bottle, which is a children's book app done by HarperCollins, and that's done very, very nicely, and certainly is engaging that particular audience for children's books. It works very well. And Design Classic by Fiden is, I think, a particularly good example of a specialist app. They tend to be expensive to do. You've got to pick certain titles to do that. And then there's the sort of single book apps, which is in the sort of block down here. There's a whole range of different ways of doing that. I've raised this point that there's American Kung Fu, putting video into them. You can put rich media in them, but a single book app sitting on the store has to be very different for it not to be logically placed on the iBook store, for example, on the Apple device. And coloured in blue are the two areas that we tend to focus on, which is the multi-book app. By that means it's effectively these are container apps we build, which are branded for publishers or branded for particular titles, or groups of titles. And into there you can publish many, many books, so it could be 20, it could be 50, it could be hundreds of books into each one of those apps. And therefore, obviously, the payback of building an app like that is much better because you can spread it over a number of different titles. And down here we have, at the bottom here, the EPUBs that have been very successful, particularly for novels, etc., running off the Kindle. Lots of the publishing houses like Penguin, etc., have been making a great deal of money out of that, which is excellent. And but the illustrated books provide more of a problem, and Simon was touching on that as far as the method of how do you get an illustrated book there. We were at Frankfurt last October, and that was really quite clear that some of the solutions for illustrated book companies were not so obvious, and I think that now is the time, as we'll discuss during this presentation, where in fact money can be made. So let's just look at those sort of figures. I've had to make a series of assumptions here, but if you really wanted to produce a mobile style app, a data-driven app, you're definitely looking at sort of 50,000 plus. That's sort of investment. That's fairly sizable investment. For a reading app, we know people who spend many hundreds of thousands doing that. Bespoke apps where you do specially for one book, making it special. There's quite a lot of developer time involved, and developers are not cheap, good ones, so they tend to be expensive. But a reading app with some enhancements certainly is something that can be done with certainly sub £10,000, so it starts to get into a sort of slightly better feel. I'm going to focus on the two main areas where we have expertise, which is illustrated ebook conversions and the multi-book channel apps. Just want to talk you through those. So let's look at the pros and cons. That's at the top there is cost. If I sort of took a typical app and divided it up by 20 books, then roughly it may cost, say, roughly like £470 a book, £75 a book. EPUB, illustrated conversion, does depend on complexity. If there's a considerable amount of tables and issues that need to be fixed and are related to the text, then that takes more time. And for those of you, I'm sure most people on the call understand that an EPUB style document is a continuous form of text from beginning to end. And so the user then resizes the text, then clearly the number of words on the page change, and then all the illustration boxes, etc., change. And the EPUBs can't handle things like multiple columns, etc. So there are sort of particular rules that you need to do to make an EPUB really work. How does it handle footnotes, for example? Clearly you want to go from a footnote, so therefore the footnotes normally go at the back of the book, and then there's a link from that to the footnote and the footnote back again. So there's basically there has to be some compositing done to actually make the book work. And there are good ways of doing that and bad ways. And part of our expertise is to make sure that, in fact, that is done well as an outsourced service and it's all signed off by the client. There's been a lot of talk about store commissions. It makes no difference whether you've got an app or whether you've got it in the iBook store or whether you've got it in the Kindle. The store commissions are pretty well the same. the appearance point there is that obviously if you've got an app, as Simon was saying before, and you've got much more, you can control the layout, the fixed page. But in the EPUB, as it stands today, you need to modify things to be able to work, as I've just spoken about. And book production, once you have the books, you can use internal ways of doing it. Submitting to the iBook store requires either you're a sizable publisher or you're an aggregator. Udo is an approved aggregator from Apple, so we tend to take, working with smaller publishers that can't deal direct with Apple, we then have the ability to submit it to the App Store using our system, to the iBook stores rather. For the promotion side, again, if you've got your own app, you have to invest more time in terms of driving people to the app. The advantage of having a multi-book app is that you can then put all your marketing resources into that app, and therefore inside that there are multiple titles, so therefore it's a more focused way of actually driving things. There are ways which, if you put groups of books together, I say Apple is quite useful at promoting, and there are packages that you can do from Kindle. Rich media options, that means basically video and audio and any type of animation in apps is a lot easier, and to date it's been much more restricted on the EPUB solutions. Just looking about pricing now, I mean, Simon was talking about the $2.99 and the pricing, the sensitivity of this. It's very important to differentiate between the pricing people pay on the iBook store on Kindle and what they actually pay for an app. Our experience is that if you charge the app too much, people are very concerned about paying the money before they see what they're actually going to get. And so for our multi-channel apps or multi-book apps, is what we do is we ensure that we recommend that the app is actually downloaded for free, and as soon as it's downloaded, the app looks at our cloud, which is a corresponding filing, so it's a cloud-based system, displays to the user all the books that we can have, and then they download from there. And generally, we always recommend there should be an element of free content so they can see what they're getting, and then they will pay the price. If you don't do that, people are very nervous about sort of paying sort of reasonable prices for things. So, but this study here by Boston Consulting Group, done very recently, showed that in the States, with a reasonable number, that's about 14,000 people they surveyed, that they were willing to pay $5 to $10 for an ebook. I think that's really quite significant that people are willing to pay this money for books, because there's so much on the net that people aren't prepared to pay for. And the great news for book companies is that we are only really talking about a cover price plus, say, the 30% for the store. The rest of it is margin. We don't have to worry about those other people that are on the list here, like magazines, who are very much concerned about advertising. So, but in an app, you've got a little bit more control of where you do on the pricing. As I said, we have 70 odd apps now, nearly 70 apps which are live, so we can see actually what's working, what isn't working. And if I look at a niche book app, so really a title or a publishing company that's not very well known, small, and puts, say, 5 or 6 books into an app, promotes it, we're seeing that that's about 1,000 downloads in the first week of the app, and then thereafter 300 to 500. In 6 months, the minimum position would be an installed base of an app of 15,000. Now, that's an install base of an app, and inside the app could be many, many books published by this particular company. For a large brand, we'd say you definitely get to 50,000 in 6 months. Incidentally, we've had ones where they've done 20,000 in the first week, but that's a bit exceptional by the way they promoted it. But in generally, we would certainly say that's very achievable. So let's just have a look at the return on investment, some break-even overview. Definitely the cheapest solution, and that's what Simon was saying, the easiest way to experiment is with the EPUB side. And I've just picked a figure, £300. If it's very complicated, it's slightly more. It's very simple, slightly less. But say if you sold it for $2.99, effectively we're talking about 167 books that have to be sold. That is not a lot considering the number of people you can reach, unless, of course, they're selling $5.99. If you're using our channel apps, it's a different game. It's going to be a higher price before you get that payback, but that's still only 300 books. And I'm going to show you a slide in a minute that shows you where that break-even might come to. But going down to the bottom of there, I put on the cost of, saying, doing a £50,000 bespoke app, and you realize you've got to be pretty serious about the title you're going to use and the investment, the payback to actually do that. So you've got to be very careful to choose the popular titles that will in fact warrant that particular way of working. So just this graph here is really what I was talking about, the break-even analysis on sort of an app that we find, is that on the left-hand side here, this is the percentage of purchases or percentage of downloads. That's a very critical figure. Let me explain what that means. Is that if you have a free app, there's a load of people who download it. Say 20,000 people download that free app, and inside there's a lot of books there. Well, by very nature of the fact they've downloaded it, they immediately define themselves as being interested in that subject. So what we're really talking about is how many of those people who downloaded can we convert to buy actually one book out of there. And the break-even is that if 40% of 15,000 downloads down here bought one book, then in fact you're break-even. And clearly, if you drive this number of app downloads, of course, the figure comes a lot better. If they buy 5 books, well, you're in the money. So that's really the relationship. It's not a big risk. Now, going back to this point about sort of Apple sort of ripping everybody off, or do they really deserve this money? And really what you're paying for on these stores is really the whole infrastructure of payment and the one click to buy. And that impulse buy is really very important for actually getting the volumes up. And let's just say if we were going bricks and mortar, we'd be certainly saying from the cover price, the bookshop would take 50% of it. And you've also got then the returns, you've also got the printing costs, and you've got the storage costs, etc., transportation. So you'd be saying your margins would be probably less than 15%, whereas down this route here, you certainly are 16%. And as Gavin was saying, is that you're also in direct contact with your readers. To some, that's a scary prospect. To others, that is saying, I'm seeing exactly what they're doing, and I'm getting all the stats, and people who work with us can log in and see the stats anytime. So that enables you to drive things properly. So let's have a look at the other reason why you should be on the iPad. This is a pretty interesting slide here. I was rather surprised by this, but this was done by MobClicks, a 1-year analysis of apps downloaded. And you can see that books are right up there with games, and that's astonishing. It's clearly a very popular thing that people are doing, and relative to the rest of those things that entertain and education. The question is, how interactive should they be? I think Simon also mentioned that you shouldn't be putting stuff in there just because it's there. It should be there for a reason. So for book reading, that's novels and things, it's a very personal thing that people have, and they get engaged in themselves. It's your relationship with that device, and the Kindle is pretty good at that. Illustrated books are somewhat different. They're sometimes informational, like cookbooks, and they're less immersive in terms of you don't go deep into it, you dip in and dip out. It's a very visual experience, so it does lead itself to a very good web experience. So there is an opportunity for video, more slideshows, so you can add more content in, so people can click on buttons, look at slideshows. All of that stuff makes the whole experience much better. I've talked about the need for promotion. Apple sort of run a 3-day algorithm, so look at sort of the growth over a 3-day period, and then that pushes you up the store. And so it's important that promotions are done, particularly when you launch, right on first point, and you then find you're moving it up after it gets you noticed. They then promote you, and it's very important to get that early impact, but it's a continuous process. So have a quick look at devices. I know a lot of people are interested in devices here, but clearly we've got the Kindle, which is a black and white, very slow refresh rate device, very popular. Now it's about at the right price point. Beforehand it was far too expensive. So clearly price is a big issue. It's a nice, relaxed reading experience, but it's not actually an illustrated book reading experience. So you've got a big advantage of the Kindle stores. Now, one of the points to remember is that the Kindle is now available on more than just the hardware device, and on those devices it needs to be in color so that, in fact, illustrated books can see their advantage. So it's definitely worth having illustrated books on the store. The tablets, of course, are multifunctional, and they are very nice for reading these type of illustrated books. And over here, it's really another part of the Boston Consulting Group survey, which was saying that given a preference, people would prefer multi-purpose readers. So we're definitely seeing a trend towards that. And why should you be on tablets? This is a nice slide from Deloitte's Touche. this is showing that in this 2011 they're forecasting that tablets will outsell netbooks. So that netbook seems to be shrinking, and it's an interesting slide in the sense that you've got mobile as well as desktop and things all on the same slide. 370 million smartphones being sold, 50 million tablets, 40 million netbooks, 150 million desktops. That gives you an idea. It's not the installed base, so the desktop and laptop installed base is pretty huge, but it's showing what's going to be sold in 2011. And of those 50 million tablets, probably 40 million are going to be iPads. So who will challenge? Very briefly, we can look at all of these players who've come along. We've got obviously iPad, who's the market leader, certainly until 2013. Then we've got BlackBerry, we've got Hewlett-Packard, who bought Web OS for bringing out their touchpad. You've got Dell, you've got Nokia tying up with Windows. That'll be next year probably. You've got the Zoom, the Motorola Zoom, which we've been using quite a lot here at UDO. We've got HTC, Samsung with the Galaxy, and Galaxy bringing 10.1. But what this is actually saying to you is that you can see that there's no standard operating system. The little green spaceman there is all the Android ones, and but in fact a lot of these are actually going their own way. And for developers like us, etc., that obviously is an issue about just how we engage with all of those things. So it's a bit like the Betamax marketplace, and that is something where you need to make sure that carefully what you're going to put your product on. If you've got the Kindle store on those other devices, then they will be able to be reading your books on the Kindle store. But let's think about the App Store. Hey, that is really, this is a very important part of Apple's strategy. It's $1.8 billion of sales. Their total sales is about $85 billion, but it's growing very quickly. And it represents a very large proportion of all the apps bought. And you can see that big blue chunk there. And only 102 is of million is Android. Thoughts of how to take advantage of digital? I just throw these in because I think it's important for this is very early stage in the marketplace. There's a lot of people experimenting. You can certainly create an app, for example, by genre, like best cooking books, etc. You can publish a book series, a sort of book series of architectural styles. I think certainly as far as the sort of channel apps that we do, where you have multiple titles, it's important to group like products together or like books together, so you can see that happening. And you can see an app for a very top author, because the advantage of these types of apps is you can drop in additional content about the author, build a brand around the author. You can market other book products into it. You can cross-promote with one-chapter teasers. You can use video, author interviews, sponsored video ads, film promotion. You can create book catalogs, of course, that sit alongside the books in the app. And you can monetize the back catalogs and archives. I think that's a very good opportunity. So let's just talk about Apple. Apple is the reason why tablets are here, because their product has really led the way, but also their ambitions. And let's just sort of try and distill all this clutter around Apple. They have principally three main strategic aims. One is to have great content on their device, and that drives higher Apple sales of the iPad, and that is, of course, critical for that. Secondly, is to make the iBook store rival the Kindle and Google Bookstore. So they are now going to try and drive whatever potentially can get onto the iBook store to be on the iBook store. So apps that really should be on the iBook store will not get approved by Apple going forward. And a lot of people have had their apps rejected that are just too like an iBook, and therefore Apple want them to be on the iBook store. And the other thing they're doing is shutting down any backdoors and ensuring that if anybody's going to sell content that's on their devices, they want the 30%. Understand those three, then that goes a long way to understanding what drives Apple's views. Now, what is good news for the illustrated book market is that Apple have just literally in the last week or so launched their illustrated book. And everybody thought they might follow along what EPUB 3 is going to do as they're on the steering group. But in fact, they've produced their own solution. And that actually does allow for structured pages, which works for illustrated books. So that's a new development, and it in fact will open up the iBook store to be a much better place for structured pages. So the things we've been talking about beforehand about having to reflow things and do things are handled to a degree by Apple's new system. But it's probably better for the point that Simon was talking about, was for a completely new eBooks to actually be produced using that system. And finally, EPUB 3. EPUB 3 has been sort of debated for a long time, and this is dealt by a committee. It's actually going to be probably released in May of this year, and that's another great opportunity for illustrated books. It will have HTML5 support, so video will go in there, rich media, interactivity, there's layout improvements, and for those of you who are dealing with global languages, like in Arabic right to left, which isn't properly supported, it'll be supported in this version. So EPUB is moving on to solve some of the problems that Simon and I have talked about beforehand. So that's an exciting part of the future. So, thank you very much, and I think I'll hand back to Philip at this point for any questions.
Yes, I've got a number of good questions, and first I'm going to put Richard on the spot and ask you to stare into your crystal ball just for a moment. What do you think the market is worth now for digital illustrated books, and what's your sense of what it will be worth in 5 years' time? And secondly, will it follow the same trajectory as the fiction market, which seems to be moving very fast now? That's for Richard.
Yeah, the actual market size today, I think, is relatively small. I think because partly because of the difficulties of getting the illustrated books onto high traction sites. I think the point I made on one of the slides beforehand was that the advantage of being on the iBook store or on the Kindle is the sheer volume that's possible on that. And that's what the novels and the conventional books have really benefited from. So I think with these new developments coming up, this will really open it up. So I think we're at maybe about, it will go by 300–400% over the next couple of years. And I think this is the, Simon said it's the year of the ebook experimentation. I think you'll also see people starting to make a good deal of money this year. Apple do not disclose their figures precisely, so we're shooting the dark a little bit here, but I think we're at the very early stage, Philip, in this marketplace, and all the tools now are here for being able to follow these guys who've been making a lot of money with conventional novels.
And for those who haven't yet started moving their content digitally, what's the beginning point? What's the first thing they should do? I think that's a question for Richard first, and then maybe Simon second. Well, I think the first thing they should do is really analyze their, what would work well on the web. I think particularly on these reading devices. I think there is no real consultancy that is going to tell you exactly what the answer is. I would say that you should start and start to get data back. And we're a great believer, anybody who's involved in working on the web, and I know that a lot of book publishers are coming to it relatively fresh. The answer is with your titles and with the web experiences, you get it from your own experience rather than from consultants who are telling that information. And the thing is to start with a number of titles which will then give you the data and the feedback to see what's worked and test the whole system. I don't think I think Simon obviously started a while ago, and I think they've benefited hugely from the feedback they got from what they've done so far about pricing, about how to present it. So the first thing is to start. Obviously there are people like us who can help, and I'm sure that there is, for the bigger players, they've already worked it out, the big players, and they've now got, they're not going backwards, they're investing more, which tells you something. Simon, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I think what we've learned in terms of content storage and origination for digital is just to try and create and hold content in ways which keeps it as flexible as possible, really. So, for instance, having the Hugh Johnson wine database in existence for the first time, despite the fact that books have been published for 30 years, has given us not just the ability to do an app, but a great deal of insight into the content in a way that I don't think we had before. It enables the book to be produced from XML generated from that database, which is all very 21st century, and it enables us to be flexible and respond to other opportunities as they arrive. For instance, I'm a geek in terms of my background, and I'm a great believer in databases in general. So, for instance, cookery, there's nothing difficult, particularly, about putting recipes into a database so that you can recombine that content in different ways. For instance, we published Miller's Antiques guides. Actually, the content for those books has been in a digital asset management system for several years, which if we decide to go, it's about flexibility really, and not having content stored in such a way that you're forced to only then use it for the medium it was originally conceived for.
And Gavin, as a small publisher, a sort of one-man band, I guess, how did you go about thinking through the process of getting your content onto digital? Was it something that was just obvious to you, and were the routes obvious to you from the beginning, or did you have to do a lot of research? That was a question for Gavin, if he's out there somewhere.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yeah, there you go. Sorry. Yeah, I'm actually a marketer by training. I've spent years in marketing, so we've kind of approached it. We're not quite a one-man band. I mean, we've got there's about half a dozen people in our business here. But what we've the way we looked at it was make your products available by any format. I mean, this is the way that we've approached it. With the market now being so diverse in the way that people are consuming books, as I said earlier when I was talking, that really as publishers what we've got to do is make that available in as many formats as the consumer wants it. So that was our starting point, really.
And how easy was it to get to an end point? What did you have to do in terms of research?
Well, I mean, I think what we had a good look round, and I mean, it became obvious quite early on that the best way for us to do this would be to work with one company, and that's why we went with Udo. And as I explained earlier, we had a relationship with them anyway from our magazine activities. And it makes sense for us to be dealing with one person who can kind of hold our hands as we go through the process.
Okay, I've got a question for Simon from the floor. Simon, would you mind sharing how you go about constructing a business model for creating an app and then on a co-edition basis?
Sure. If you know Octopus at all, you'll know that co-edition is a very important part of how we publish, and what we've done, especially what we did at Frankfurt last year, what we will be doing at London Book Fair in a few weeks' time, is having well worked up app propositions which we are taking to talk to co-edition publishers about, to talk to our potential partners about, with a mathematical financial understanding of what level of buy-in we need to deliver a project at an acceptable, what we regard as an acceptable commercial level of risk. So in the same way as putting together a print run on a co-edition book, you'll be looking to get X number of publishers in at a certain amount of contribution in order to make that happen. The first one that we did, which was Hugh Johnson with our German partners, was done in a more collegiate way, in the sense that we both conceived the idea of doing it independently, and it was a pooling of resources and developing a shared vision of what the product would be, and then sharing the risk and devising a royalty scheme that everyone was happy with. But going forward, it's very much about us driving the creation of these digital products, which we then look to get buy-in, in many cases from publishers who whose digital markets may be slightly less developed than that of the UK.
Okay, I've got a question which I think is probably best answered by Richard. Two questions really along the same lines. One is, can the recent developments within the iBook store, whereby they're letting illustrated content in, does that mean a book such as the Heart and the Bottle could go straight into the iBook store, or does it still have to be an app? And the second part of that question was, can you say something about the illustrated animated children's books in general? Do they have to be bespoke, or can they run seamlessly into the iBook store, considering the recent developments?
Philip, in general, something like the Heart in the Bottle would always remain as an app. What Apple have done in their latest version is to deal with the structured page issue, which is probably the most difficult thing in the EPUB format, and that makes it easier to read with a nice photograph and a caption underneath, and you move through it. But what it doesn't do is give you the same level of interactivity and abilities to access the features as we're saying beforehand, the sort of geolocation issues and all the other issues at the moment. Some of those things will probably come. We must assume that Apple are working steadily, but there is a significant difference between the interactivity you can get with Heart in the Bottle, which requires a lot of programming, and all of that code really can't go into an app that's sitting on the iBook store. They will remain apps, and they will remain good apps. It just means that whereas the iBook store really wasn't really suited for illustrated books without a lot of reformatting, this latest change makes it a lot better, but it's way short of the type of functionality you can get with an app.
And so I guess a supplementary question for Simon is, where do you see therefore the future for illustrated content, given the costs of producing individual apps compared with, say, just putting it in a flat format in the iBook store? Which do you think you would, or Octopus will do in the future?
I think that, I mean, the new Apple fixed format is beautiful. I mean, it's finally a chance to see illustrated titles on a device in a way that does justice to what we as book designers actually create. So I'm sure that when we have a standards-based version of that, the vast majority of our digital publishing will be focused more on straight translation. So the majority of what we do will be you want the majority of what you do to be a relatively straightforward thought process. We are doing this as a book. Are we also going to do it as a whatever the format is? And you will then, I suspect, have a smaller number of larger projects, which are your kind of marquee projects, and what technology platform they target will depend on the state of the market. It might be iPad this year, it might be something else next year, and in 5 years' time you can guarantee it will be something we haven't thought of yet. So it's a question of that kind of those kinds of projects, I suspect, will continue to be in the minority, certainly in terms of the amount of our publishing they represent. But that's about as specific as I think it's possible to be at the moment.
Okay, I have two technical questions. One is, what's the cost of a co-edition in another language as opposed to just doing it in English? And a very simple question, simple to answer hopefully, what is the structured page format? I think Simon can probably address both of those.
To take those in the order they were asked, I can't really talk about numbers, but in terms of percentages, the cost of adding an additional language to an app development project is between 10 and 20%, depending on the volume of text and issues like that. So it is a relatively cheap thing to do. Once you've, when you've invested in the core platform itself, adding languages, as in most aspects of publishing, is not the big issue. In terms of the second issue, Apple are referring to their new illustrated format as fixed format eBooks. They are actually, all of the documentation is included in the newest version of the iBookstore guidelines. So if you're, for publishers who already have iTunes accounts, they will be able to get hold of those guidelines. Most of the books that are currently available to play with are children's illustrated titles, which were heralded on the bookseller last week, so they are available to play with now.
And what does structured format mean in this context? Does it just mean that
effectively it means that they're not, the content is not reflowed, so all the elements of the design appear exactly where they appear on the spread of the book. You can lock it down so that the book only appears as a double-page spread in landscape mode, for instance, which is obviously very useful for a lot of children's publishing. It means that you've got background images behind text. It means you've got text effectively floating on the page in all kinds of fonts, in the fonts that were used in the original book. What it doesn't mean is that with a straight EPUB, when you change the text size, then the entire book reflows, and that just doesn't happen with a fixed format. It is, it is locked down. So from an accessibility point of view, you don't have those advantages of being able to increase the text size.
Okay. A question for Gavin from the floor. How did you price the same ebook app on different formats? Is it uniform, and do you yet have any sales data, or is it too early?
It's a bit too early for sales data at the moment. $2.99, just really going from what we've been advised, but also gut feeling. I mean, I'm a fairly early adopter, as they say in marketing terms. So, I've been downloading apps for a few years now, and it seems to me that anything over $2.99 is considered to be expensive. And also, I think consumers are quite savvy. I mean, you see a physical book, that there's, that there's been a printer involved. That it's been shipped up and down a motorway a few times. It's been put on a shelf in a shop, or it's been posted out. That costs money. And I think whilst a lot of Amazon are keen for publishers to price digital and real books at the same price, I think consumers can see through that. So I think you have to offer a discount. So it's $2.99 for the digital version and $3.99 for the hard copy.
A question for Richard. I think you talked about having a book app within which you could do various things, and one person listening wanted to know what that was. Could you explain a bit more about it? Can it hold, for example, up to 20 books? That was a question for Richard.
Hello. Yeah, sorry, I just dropped out on the call because of some technology there. Sorry, can you just repeat the question again?
I can. You talked about having a book app as a kind of repository for other types of things within that app, and somebody just wants to know, what can that app hold? Can it hold, for example, 20 books?
Yeah. Well, the app can hold pretty well any document. So it can hold a book. It can hold a catalog, for example, a book catalog. It can hold a for example, invitations to a particular event like the London Book Fair if we wish to. Basically, any document can be placed in that. What happens is if you place a document or a book into the file that sits in the cloud, everybody with the app installed gets a ping notification to say something new has actually been arrived, and they look at it and they can download it. So the advantage of having these type of apps is that you form a community, and you can then communicate with that. So if you have 100,000 people with the app installed, they've got the books there, but you can then communicate directly with them and therefore cross-sell to other books or to give them more information. So it's more than just publishing online, it's a marketing channel, and therefore you can put other things in that thing. That answers the question, Philip.
Yes. Are there any implications for profitability within that scenario in the sense that Apple wants a 30% cut of whatever's sold from that app. Does that change the economic model at all?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of talk about the 30% cut. I mean, the 30% cut effectively is a payment not just for taking the money and making it simpler, but it's really the whole of the infrastructure and the information that you get back. So I think that overall, I don't see Apple changing that in the short term, but it does mean that any sort of attempt that people have to try and not pay the 30%, Apple will take a pretty dim view of that and actually sort of cut you off or shut you down. I mean, we talk to Apple on quite a regular basis about this, and it's quite clear that any systems that are not going to be using the App Store to take the 30% are actually not going to be allowed to publish. So that's very much central in their argument. We can see that they're making this money on the App Store. They want to make a lot more. But I think overall, I think it's a very consumer-friendly way of actually buying a book, and we should never forget that. The consumers at the end of the day are who we want to buy these books.
So we'll all have to live with the 30%.
I'm afraid so, Philip. It might come down over time, but it's not, I don't see any movement at all from their side of changing that. They have a real strategy to build the in-app and the app purchasing value of their business as a percentage of total sales. That's what they're going to do.
Okay. The question for Simon, maybe from somebody in his own office. Do you work with commissioning editors in developing content for non-print opportunities? If so, are you asking them to do anything different or new when briefing their authors?
Yes, I work with them. In fact, I sit with them, which is an interesting point, I think, in general, because there can be a question mark with digital over how it slots into the business. Is it marketing led? Is it project management led? But I now report to our publishing director, sit with our commissioning editors, go to our publishing meetings, and try and make digital a crucial part of our publishing. And I think the fact that I sit with the commissioning editors means that they can't help but incorporate digital thinking into commissioning new series, and as the questioner rightly recognises, as illustrated publishers, we have a lot of leeway to think about what we want to publish and to decide how we're going to do it, and that is being reflected in conversations with authors. It's being reflected in conversations with packagers. It is being reflected in commissioners thinking about apps to partner with books, apps to follow up books, apps which may not have a direct relationship to any one particular piece of physical publishing. So it's just a process of being there and talking about it every day, really.
And Gavin, you're an author, publisher, marketeer, as you mentioned. Do you think digital is lending power to your elbow as those multiple roles coalesce?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, for us, it's massively exciting. I think for so long, the book market's been sort of dominated by these powerful retailers, and I have like a tremendous sense of hope that there's all sorts of ways for me to get my content out there. And I love writing. I mean, it's a passion of mine as well. So I mean, I'm lucky that I happen to have a publishing business as well. But I mean, I love writing, and I think for any for small publishers, it's a huge opportunity at the moment, and seize it.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up in about 5 minutes. We've been on for an hour and 10 minutes now. Just time for a couple more questions if you want to use the webinar control panel just to ask the final questions. I've got a question for Richard from the floor. Has anyone found there was a limit to the number of features you can have in an app, or what most parents or children can cope with before they lose interest? What's your experience of that?
Well, that's particularly obviously a question asked about children's books. I think I would say that if I took generally, one of the features, well, as you add more features, you increase the actual size of to download. There are certainly 500 megabyte style downloads out there when people put in lots of rich media content into it. And I think that experience is not a good experience for a mass marketplace unless you've got a very determined audience who are going to actually do this. So I think we should be careful about going overboard, about putting too much in there. But as far as children are concerned, I haven't got any direct relevant experience about children's books. I would say children have a pretty strong appetite for touching things and popping things out. But we're talking about sort of younger children here. As they get older, into the teen areas, then they want to have the rich media side. They want to be able to have the video pop up, more interest, much more of that type of interaction rather than of the man with the balloon who pops out and wanders across the screen. But children love to discover things, and the touch screen is a fantastic way for children to interact. So I don't think there's any specific limit, but I would say, Philip, that very large downloads we should be careful of, because we have to respect that not everybody has got very fast broadband, and we're trying to get books that can be a good experience for a very wide audience.
Okay, final question I think to Simon. Between the app and the plain iBookstore illustrated book, does the enhanced ebook risk getting squeezed out?
I think it possibly does, but I think that rather depends on what the enhanced ebook ends up being. I think the enhanced ebook, which is the text as it is published in a physical book plus some bits of audio and video, probably isn't going to take the world by storm. Although it was interesting that, well, Philip, I believe you were on it, that BBC Radio 4's Front Row was talking about them last week. So they're obviously making some kind of an impression. But I think, and this I suspect is more relevant to fiction in the short term, but I suspect anything which is commissioned and created specifically for the enhanced ebook, for the tablet market, probably does have an opportunity to carve out a niche for itself, which might be, I suspect also especially true of children's titles. So I don't think they're going to take over the world, but I do think there's a place for them.
Okay, I'm going to allow one more cheeky question, because I think it goes to the real heart of where we are when we look at the Kindle and the iPad. And the question is, are digital publications realistic for fine art books? I think, Simon, you said that the iBookstore, the new illustrated bit of that was created beautiful books. Are they beautiful enough for art books, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think I can see Faden type heavily illustrated coffee table titles making the jump to illustrated to digital publishing, with formats that are truly truly respectful of the source material. So yes,
Richard,
I think so.
Do you want to chime in?
I just fully agree with that. I think our discussions are such. It's one of the things to think about, though, is the price point for these type of books, because there's a lot of rights that need to be settled with photographers, etc., for coffee table books. But I think there is a nice appetite for very good quality images which come up beautifully on these tablets. And I think the dip-in, dip-out thing I've talked about of having these books on your iPad. Remember, that a lot of people with iPads have disposable income. I think there is a market there, but I think they will be higher priced and they won't be in volume. But it's important, if you are going to do them, you do them very well.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you all for attending the seminar. Thank you to our panelists, Richard Stevenson, Gavin Griffiths and Simon Applebe. We'll be sending an email asking for feedback, and please do send feedback so that we can do an even better one next time around. You will also get a link through to the video of the full webinar, which you can choose to view again or send round to your colleagues. So thank you once again, and thanks to the panelists. It's been a great session.
Thank you.
Thank you.